Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, friends. Very, very excited for this afternoon's conversation. My name is Saif Ishoof, and I proudly serve as the founder of Lab 22C. Very passionate about civic tech and the conversation that we're about to have. For those of you who are just joining us right now, whether in the audience or remotely, we're about to have a rock star conversation about an issue topic that I know many of us who are here for Smart Cities care a lot about. And the issue topic we're talking about with this esteemed panel is around open data, digital privacy, and citizen trust. That's a mouthful, word salad, but nevertheless, we have some subject matter experts here that are gonna help us actually unpack and better understand what are the salient issue topics around this very, very complex space. And so I'm gonna attempt to do something a little bit different than the usual standard biography, because each one of our speakers, Clara, Mark, John Paul, are very, very well known in their spaces, and we only have about 31 minutes, and I wanna go deep very quickly. So where I'd like to start with, because you can read the biographies of our esteemed panel, is each one of them giving us a little bit of situational orientation about their background and how it correlates to the nexus of these three issue topics: open data, digital privacy, and citizen trust, and essentially how their experiences up until this moment have positioned them in a place to be able to be thought leaders, subject matter experts, et cetera, on this confluence of these issue topics. So I'm gonna start immediately to my left hand with Clara to share with us a little bit about situationally orienting her background against this issue topic.
Absolutely, and I will start off in a very cheesy format with a quote by Mark Twain. There are two important days of your life: the day you are born and the day you find out why. And for me, when I was really young, I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area. I knew from a young age I really wanted to solve inequality in this world. And that's a really big problem. It's really hard to slice. But growing up around Silicon Valley, it became very easy and apparent to me that there is a digital divide that is happening as innovation and capital is concentrated in only so many cities around the world. In 2011, 2012, I started an organization in Los Angeles with Eric Garcetti called Hack for LA to really think about the early stages of the open data movement. And that was for me really the taste of what it means to have public-private partnership. When you have developers building on open data, it's not just a city running initiative, it's a number of people coming together. I also worked in the private sector for a few years for Microsoft in their public sector team and saw around me nobody with actually government experience, which led me to actually join a program at the White House called the White House Presidential Innovation Fellows Program. And while there, I served as the CTO of two teams, one interagency, one at Homeland Security, focused on election security and homegrown extremism. And I was bridging my experience from the tech world back into government. And a lot of the issues that I was at the forefront of leading included issues like election security, working with election officials all around the world. And in 2016, you saw this massive breakdown of trust. Even if information was there, even if it came from government, even if it came from local elected officials, citizens were having the lack of trust of what to think about when they read things online. And all of this came together when I started actually the first professional association in the field of trust and safety, which are professionals at companies today that try to adjudicate what should be allowed and what shouldn't be. Ultimately, what I came to is the basic thing that is broken is our web and the incentive model that it's built on. Today, the most important currency isn't a blockchain, it's actually data and the way that data is owned. And today, data does not belong in the hands of citizens. When you search for something on Google, it's not like you're searching in a physical library, picking out a book. There's a lot of biases that build on top of that. And so that's something that I'm incredibly passionate about with the work that I'm doing with Filecoin to really build a distributed data storage network where data really belongs back in the hands of the people. We're around 1/100th the cost of Amazon Web Services, and we're giving a ton of data away for free because a lot of public institutions, a lot of nonprofits, a lot of data that is open that should belong in the hands of people do not actually own it. And a lot of this leads to inequality around the world because a lot of capital is built off of information silos that only an elite few can have. And so that is my why. That is why I'm here today.
Clara, let's give her a round of applause for that, because and the fact you looped it back so elegantly to the Mark Twain quote, I think our country, society, and world is a better place because you navigated and found your why. Mark, please.
So I started out as the City of Philadelphia's first geographic information officer in 2014 with this mission of pulling data in for decision making, because at that point we had a strong grassroots program where the GIS entities throughout city government were sharing data, but it wasn't being really published to the public, only in a yearly snapshot that would go to one of the major universities to make available on the web. But more importantly, we weren't able to solve decision-driven problems because there was still so much siloing in administrative data. And when I got that role, I just took on the problem of data governance within government and set up the structures with a very smart team and allied ourselves with the open data team, which was separate. So as we were moving forward in structuring strong governance for the releasing of enterprise data internally, we worked with the open data team on how you publish it publicly, and then made very good use of that for our internal questions. Yeah, it's coming up. Uh-oh. I think we're good to go. But that resets the clock a little bit, right?
That was like a fire alarm version of a denial of
That
service
was just
attack.
to make sure everyone's awake here.
Welcome to Miami. Yeah. There's no cafecito. After this, we'll take care of you. But the fire alarm got us thinking. Mark, please continue.
Well, to bottom line it, we aligned what we were trying to do in terms of creating tools that would help people make decisions internally and also externally for the public by making sure we were using all of the open data that we got published. So there's a product that is called atlas.phila.gov that is the best example of that. There's dozens, at least 3 dozen open data sets that feed into it. It allowed us to deprecate 12 different applications that people were using, both internal and externally, into one source. So elegantly designed, we were able to innovate, and we were able to, unlock the data and prove that the open data program had this decision-making value for everyone, and it wasn't just out there to be downloaded or used periodically. So I continue to advocate for that in my role, and I'm super, super happy to be on this panel to talk about where that future might lie.
Mark, thank you so much for that insight, and I can comfortably now say that Mark is my #1 favorite CIO in America.
Replaced Mike?
Because Mike is now retired, so you are now officially. But I know we're going to hear from Mike Sarasti, the extraordinary CIO here in the city of Miami, and Mark, who has been his spin twin and I know partner in impact in a lot of ways. John Paul, you and WeLink Cities have been doing some extraordinary work at the nexus of these 3 complex issue topics. We'd love to hear about your orientation and role vis-a-vis these issue topics.
Thank you. It's great to be here. I grew up in the other end of Pennsylvania in Pittsburgh in the 1980s, and it was a place that was undergoing a lot of challenges back then. The decline of the steel industry meant the city had to reinvent itself, and I got a front row seat because my parents were city planners to seeing trust being built across sectors, community-based organizations, local government, state. But on top of that, I saw the role of technology. Things like GIS, when it was first being used in government, was able to show people some source of truth that they could agree upon. They could have a baseline. They could figure out how to improve things from there. So that was something I saw very early on. My career progressed, and I found myself a little over a decade ago working in the White House in the early days of the open data movement, when we were realizing, we should probably go beyond simply opening up weather data, which, hey, it's been open for decades. It's wonderful. It supports all kinds of services. Unfortunately, it doesn't allow the Miami forecasters to tell me when it's going to rain. But nonetheless, it's useful.
That's what horoscopes are for.
That's what horoscopes are for. So over a decade ago, people realized there are these unlocked resources that we should really do more with. We should make available for entrepreneurs, for researchers, for journalists to do what they will with, because ultimately this data belongs to the public. And cities and states got very involved. New York City led the way in 2013 with really groundbreaking open data law. And fast forward a few years later, I found myself in the role of Chief Technology Officer of New York City. And we were working on universal broadband because the reality is, even going into the pandemic, we knew that broadband was essential, and we saw how unfair it was that 3 out of every 10 New York City households didn't have broadband at home. We were working on digital services to ensure that people actually could get what they needed at their fingertips, which became increasingly important during the pandemic. And then we're looking at artificial intelligence, IoT, what was coming, and getting ready for that. But then when I looked at open data, it made me kind of sad. It made me kind of sad that we'd done all this work as a community a decade ago, and then it was kind of stagnant. So yes, some people continue to benefit from open data every single day, but I don't know if we really achieved the promise that open data had back then. And I'm excited by what we can do to reinvigorate this concept that this is the people's data, and those of us who are in government or have a chance to do a tour of duty in government, we should do what we can to make that data as useful as possible, as available as possible. And when we talk about digital privacy, every time we say that, I want to ask people to think a little bit more broadly about digital rights. So privacy is a very important digital right, but cybersecurity is very important. Accountability, transparency, equity. There are a variety of digital rights that we need to think about balancing at all times. Because again, while privacy is important, it's not the only digital right out there. And if we want to build trust across sectors of society, we've got to take a holistic view. We've got to work on this together, because I will finish my remarks with a reference to a Pew study that I bet a lot of people here have seen over the last few years, which is about the decline in trust in the United States of America. And when people were surveyed in the 60s, 77% of Americans said they trusted their government. When they were surveyed in the 20-teens, that was 13%. 13%. And there are a lot of reasons behind that, and we here and in this room are not going to solve all those reasons, but I think there are places where we can make an impact, and that's what I'm excited about exploring.
Thank you for sharing that, and a deep appreciation for your work in this space. And I came out of higher ed, and we're also all prisoners of our own discipline. And as a lawyer, had an opportunity to help start an initiative of universities called the Public Interest Technology Network, along with the New America Foundation and several other awesome groups. And you begin to realize that this is such an unexplored domain around what happens. Like you kind of, it's almost like when you're in college and you have the theology class and they'll ask you like, can God create a rock he can't move or she can't move? You get to these issues and problem sets that are so unexplored. And for example, can a city data mine archival police body camera footage? And what does the case law say on stuff like that? And you wind up in these sort of bizarre rabbit holes that necessitate leadership like the folks that are represented here, and it really like makes it very tangible and real, something that could be this very abstract sort of nerdy grad school type essay, and then you realize that policymakers are themselves grappling with trying to understand how they create a clear synthesis and then actually go out there to residents and communicate this in a way that hopefully buttresses the community trust. And so I want to like have this is like question 1B follow up. This is a super prepared panel, so I'm going with the flow. I'm sticking with the plan. But do we have to rethink how open data programs work? I mean, this is like an open volley to everyone here. Clara, Mark, John Paul. Do we have to rethink how these programs are actually working, Clara?
Yeah, I would say we absolutely should, because unfortunately today open data is not truly open. We actually saw a huge decline in trust, as John mentioned, around citizens trusting what is coming out of governments, which is why the role of private-public partnerships are so important. At the Filecoin Foundation, and actually earlier this morning, we announced the launch of the Public Data Commons, where we're trying to preserve humanity's most important information and really make sure that there is a backup copy. One example is we recently partnered with Harvard's Berkman Center. There's an amazing professor there, Jonathan Zittrain, who talks about the issue of link rot, which is when you are looking for legal documents online, somewhere along that pipeline, a link just doesn't work. And these are links for important legal research. It could be citizen data that they deserve, that the government has said will be accessed by people that they just cannot access. And one thing that we've been doing since we had our network launch 2 years ago is we've been working to preserve as much information on the web as possible. We gave a $10 million grant to the Internet Archive. If you've ever had to look for archival websites, the Wayback Machine is a great resource. You can look at the early days of your MySpace website, anything else out there. We are also preserving everything from film archives. We're working with Stanford University and the USC Shoah Foundation. We preserved 50,000 testimonials of Holocaust survivors. As their stories become lost, we want to make sure that there is preserved copies. We're also looking at this from a human rights standpoint. So an example is with the circumstances in Ukraine and Russia, the first thing that happens in a time of war is government or important information around a country just gets destroyed. And we are working with a number of NGOs and nonprofits, as well as members of the Ukrainian government, to do backup archival storage of all of that information. We are also very much looking ahead in storing information that's happening with NFTs. 80 million NFTs are stored on our network. So if you own an NFT, you're already using our technology. We're looking at metaverse. We're looking at what does the metaverse mean when you have National Geographic working in it, and how can we think about things like conservation and public lands, right? And so there are so many important things that today, unfortunately, like I started with, data is the most important currency of our time, and data is not affordable. A lot of people in this room who are CIOs, CTOs, they cannot predict the budget of how much things will cost. And that's something that, unfortunately, will get taken off the balance sheet if a city decides that they don't want to support the upkeeping of data. I was having lunch yesterday, randomly talked to the person next to me who was the former mayor of the 4th largest city in Mexico. One of his proudest initiatives was actually opening up data around how polluted the river was there. That was one of the milestones in his term. And the next mayor after him just decided to take off that data because they did not want to deal with that environmental crisis. And these are the things that I would say is not the responsibility of governments, but should be also the responsibility of communities to make sure we can have a backup copy.
Thank you, Clara. One puzzle piece that I love that you touched upon, which is about the preservation of the digital public commons, and I'll give like an editorial comment about this. I think it also is layered against a global geopolitical environment where we are beginning to see the deep consequences of a struggle, existential global struggle between computational democracies and computational autocracies, and that actually also matters. So that's like another conversation, but the work that you're doing at Filecoin is very, very important around kind of keeping that ground as well preserved as we possibly can. And Mark, I'm sure you have lots of thoughts as a CIO about the future of open data programs and what can be done.
I have lots of thoughts as someone who had to operationalize open data and encountered a lot of problems and would be at forums like this and be there specifically to talk about the problems and have 3 other CDOs, CIOs get up there and then talk about how great the open data program was. And I'd realize they're using the same platform we're using that isn't allowing people to actually download these big data sets. So they don't actually know how this program's working. Which is to say that we had this, with every good intention, build it and they will come. And what happened was we spent a lot of time scouring our departments for data, publishing it, and what turned out is only a fraction of those get utilized on a regular basis. Our metric is 300 plus data sets that we published and we keep active, and either they renew daily, weekly, monthly, or ad hocly, and some of them have never been renewed because they were a one-time release. Out of that 300, 16 or less are actively used, and most of them get consumed by that program I talked about. So in 2019, I said to the team, I don't want you to release anymore unless you absolutely have to. There's probably 3 critical things that still need to be published around budgets that is going to take time to work on. I want you to pivot to engagement. I want you to seek out every forum that you can talk about data, partner with all of the other city agencies who are doing one-on-ones at libraries and rec centers. I want you to talk about these tools and how the data is going to be valuable, and they did, and we got some good success out of that. We did a survey to figure out who was using open data in 2020 during the pandemic. The information overwhelmingly told us it was journalists and academic researchers. And one of the things that they did want from us was not more data, but they wanted some longitudinal data. We do not do a snapshot of everything and then save it. If data gets updated in licensing, that's what we publish. If it's a one-time release, that's it. So we have a dashboard that we produced that shows anywhere in the pipeline where we are with that data, what its refresh is, what's coming down the pipe, and then who's utilizing it around the world. And I think that type of transparency is really important. But the thing that we haven't solved for, and we're now in conversations with Filecoin about, is how do we transition our capacity problem with maintaining data sets that no one's looking at or using, not relinquishing that, but moving it into another storage format, a way for access, so it basically comes off of our balance sheet in a sense. Because we're paying for that storage up there, and at some point, the good folks at Esri are gonna say to me, you use as much money as the national data infrastructure team at the federal government. We can't keep charging you the rate that we charge a city. So either pay more, and we're going to have to look at and how we manage our storage, and some of that open data, we're going to have to transfer it somewhere without losing it.
Mark, what I think is so commendable about the approach that you're taking, and this is not just for two of my friends in the audience that are doctoral dissertation nerds, but that you realize that for lots of public stakeholders, access to longitudinal data makes a huge, huge difference. And it cannot be in any way dismissed versus looking at these massively sort of galaxy-like data sets that can't actually tell a narrative and help better inform discrepancies, inequities, and other sort of challenge points that even your public policy decision makers have to make. John Paul.
So I hate to agree with other panelists on a panel because it's just not interesting. But yes, we absolutely have to revisit things because it would be crazy not to. It'd be crazy not to look at what's worked, what hasn't worked. I think the research that Mark and his team in Philadelphia have done probably mirrors the experience in a lot of other places. So when I think about what's necessary to know whether we're really empowering people to prosper in this digital society, ever more digital society we live in, obviously, we need a base layer of connectivity. That's what I'm doing every single day at WeLink. But then on top of that, we need skills, we need tools, we need data, and then we need to protect those digital rights. And it's that package, it all works together. It's not just one piece in isolation. And so what I'd really like to see more cities do, more states do, more governments do, but also more communities demand is that those pieces be brought together. For example, if you think about a data strategy, very few governments have a real comprehensive data strategy. But if they did, that would affect all those different pieces I just mentioned. It would relate to the protection of rights, it would relate to the types of skills, it would relate to connectivity issues. And it would, I think, and we have to see it happen to really know, but I think it would cause those in positions of power to make different decisions about their data. Everything from open data to other types of data sets that have various reasons not to be open. But that base level strategy so rarely exists. And I think that's a conversation we need to have. That's a place where what Filecoin is doing and other next generation approaches very well may have a role to play in this, the next decade, call it, of the open data movement and the data strategies more broadly that cities create.
I'm going to jump into, we've got about 9 minutes left, but we've got two big questions that we want to hone in on. And I think it's relevant because we've got a lot of mayors that are in our audience in the Smart City Expo, and big shout out to the organizers, Arti Tandon and her entire team for making us all feel welcome in this space, all of us who are passionate about this. But the first question, and this is popcorn style, is really around for the elected officials, for the roles that each one of you have played or currently play, Mark, in your case. What are the key questions elected stakeholders should be asking so that they could become better stewards of the public trust in this arena of open data, digital privacy, and citizen trust? Because we know that, I mean, we have extraordinary mayors that are floating through. We just had Mayor Hancock from Denver who was up here. We've got lots more great mayors that are around all over the place. But there's a whole new generation of elected leadership that are coming in. Oftentimes, passion and tenacity eclipses subject matter expertise. What should we be arming these elected leaders who are stewards of the public trust with to be better protectors of, if you will, the digital realm for their residents?
Go for
it, Mark.
So one thing that I've heard over and over again is I've talked to other communities about open data and their privacy is they immediately want to jump to like recreating the wheel in a sense. And instead of taking stock of who's the subject matter expert on these issues of data, they want to go out and just like, let's hire a CDO, let's hire an analytics team, let's hire a chief data privacy officer, when in fact you have people whose responsibilities now are chief security information. They know everything that they probably need to know about HIPAA privacy, PII, other types of security. They're already working with teams on securing that information and making sure it's meeting requirements. The GIS people were your #1 users of data and the creators of that data and knew the context for which it could answer questions and for which it was completely an inappropriate use of that data to try to answer some policy question. Tap your resources first, get that list, and that would go back to John's point about if you have a data governance policy, part of that asset mapping has to have already occurred or should be renewed on a regular basis. So where's your data governance policy is the #1 question, and what are your assets is the second. And then thirdly, I just want to make a point about when we release that data to the public, there's a context of the operation that is not in the data itself. It may be written out in the metadata, which I highly recommend. Do we have metadata? That's #3. Are we structuring all of our data sets with metadata that explains exactly what it is and what it isn't? But there's something about the context in which it's created and which it's supposed to be applied doesn't get carried through even with that metadata. And I have to give a props to Mike Sorosty for thinking about how to operationalize process as machine readable data, and look to him for how that actually gets done and where that will be in the future. But I think that's something to ask also is there's an operational context to this data. How do you explain it to me as a policymaker? Give it to me as an elevator pitch, and then make sure my leadership knows that too, so they don't make mistakes with the use of the information.
What I like about what you said is at some level we almost need like fundamental. I'm going to give a cheesy reference here because it's getting late and I want people to pay attention. If you have little kids, there's a YouTube series called Cocomelon. So it's actually the #3 most watched channel on YouTube. We almost need like Cocomelon level parcels of information to better inform our elected officials about some of these issue topics because it's complicated. Clara?
Yeah, I will add to that. I think for us at least, it's so important to make sure that people have the chance to explore opening up data, and not just governments, but also local organizations. You have to remember, even here in Miami or in other cities, we have so much innovation happening, and so many companies are collecting the data that sometimes governments don't even have. And that's why today, this morning, we announced the Public Data Explorer Awards. We're giving $50K per city to community organizations. This could be community organizers, these could be nonprofits, these could be groups that just want to open up data, want to explore decentralized data, want to figure out what data access means for their cities. And so for me, I just really want to emphasize the point that for data to truly belong in the hands of people, we need multiple people thinking about opening up their data, not just cities. And we also need cities to collaborate with these organizations. It's not just one way, it's two-way. And we also need the mechanisms for enabling these groups to explore the movement with us.
I have a 19-month-old son, so I will also give a shout out to Cocomelon, JJ, TomTom, the whole crew.
There you go.
Fantastic
What?
program. My advice to elected officials or anyone in a position of power would be don't focus on actions, focus on outcomes. Because in New York City, for example, I know that we, through our open data program, have put nearly 4 billion rows of data out there. Does that matter? No, it does not. The real question is what changed? What was made better because of those actions? And so even if you have to measure actions in the early days just to know you're doing something, as quickly as you can, transition to measuring outcomes. And that I don't think has happened in general. Of course, there are exceptions, but in general, it's not happening enough. I also think with the work that Filecoin and Clara are doing, it's a real opportunity to start looking at outcomes. In one of my last months on the job in New York City, we ran an experiment with Filecoin to just explore and test it out and see what it would mean to store open data on the Filecoin ecosystem. And we saw real outcomes of dollars saved, of the continued accessibility, low latency, things that we needed to know in order to bake that into conversations around, as I mentioned earlier, what a data strategy should look like and where approaches like this might fit in the future. So I'll just echo outcomes, not actions.
I love that idea of outcomes. I mean, so much, especially when we're thinking about elected officials and how we better support them in those roles. So we've got about 3 minutes left, and we have that one spicy question that we have to ask, because if you're not tracking, today is the merge. If you don't know, then I can't help you, but I think everybody here knows what that means with the Ethereum. And it's relevant because we've got these leaders, and one can imagine that an elected official comes in and he or she is inspired by the power of the blockchain movement and the future of the decentralized web. Leaders like the three here, or the folks who occupy their roles in city halls and state governments and county halls all over America, is there relevance? And can Web3 and blockchain technologies play a role in helping with the navigation of these issues of open data, digital privacy, and citizen trust? Is there a space for blockchain and the decentralized web vis-a-vis this? And we've got like 40 seconds each to close this out. Who wants to go first?
I can start. There's a handful of examples. We have a public data commons website that just launched today that just covers endless examples of case studies. But one particular example is definitely just making sure that, in journalists and media around this room, we can verify the source of knowledge. We can do that with blockchain technology. We can verify that a photo came from a particular source. And I think it's innovation like this that can really help restore trust. It's one thing to put out data. It's another to make sure that the data is not altered and that it's trackable. And that's something that Web3, a lot of passionate security enthusiasts, that's why I got involved in blockchain in 2011. We all care about making sure that data can be actually secure, verified when it's stored. And that's something that, unfortunately, is harder to do in the Web 2 world.
Mark.
If you've seen me here at all at the conference, you know that I play a skeptic on the stage and probably am not one in real life. But that being said, there is a place. I think we've clearly charted a path for that, which is to say it's not everything that's being made out to be, in the last 12 months in social media about, blockchain changes the world and everything's utopia. There is going to be an information technology solution for which blockchain makes sense. And when you think about the community being able to be involved and individuals having ownership, it seems to be the clearest path to that. And in one of the earlier conversations we had yesterday, the term open data economy got coined, and it was really an epiphany to me because we've been talking about Web3 being ownership and it having economic value to artists. And with blockchain being just an evolution of the open data standards and open source movement, it just made sense that, yes, it's unlocking an economic tool or an economic mechanism for which we can now participate, and open data now plays a role in that somehow. And I think Filecoin makes a very good use case for that and how they've set up like their token orchestration.
John Paul.
My answer is I think so. There are some people who think not. The reality is none of us know. And the only way to figure it out is to try, to test, to experiment. So I want to give kudos to Clara and the team at Filecoin. I'm excited to see what happens with the public data commons and these awards that will be available for cities and civic tech communities to get in and experiment and test things out so that we all know a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, what happened? What did we learn? In what ways is this actually making life better?
Thank you, everyone. Let's give it up to our panelists, John Paul Farmer, Mark Wheeler, Clara Tsao. Thank you so much, everyone.